Senator Kane, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Philip Shetler-Jones. I'm the Senior Research Fellow for Indo-Pacific Security at the Royal United Services Institute in London. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion on AUKUS, taking stock and looking forward. This event caps 2 days of discussions co-hosted by the Australia Strategic Policy Institute, the Centre for New American Security, and the Royal United Services Institute. This has been the third annual Trilateral AUKUS dialogue, where officials, academia, and think tank community and the private sector from all three nations discussed the progress of AUKUS Pillars 1 and 2. Topics included the wider strategic implications of AUKUS, regional reactions, how to use Pillar 2 to unlock innovation and speed high-tech development, addressing workforce and industrial capacity issues, and what's next in the legislative agenda. As you'll hear in a short while from our speakers today, we've had a very insightful and stimulating dialogue. Without in any way diminishing what we did yesterday, I would like to suggest that this public discussion we're going to do now is, in some sense, the most important part of what we've done in these 2 days. And let me briefly explain why. The purpose of AUKUS is to contribute to deterrence. According to one infamous expert, deterrence is defined as the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack. Actually, that's Dr. Strangelove definition. One of the speakers yesterday put it slightly differently, that deterrence creates a sense of risk in the mind of the adversary. And when they wake up each morning and consider whether to make their move, it's that sense of risk that leads them to the conclusion, not today. Then it stands to reason that producing that sense of risk will require effective communication. AUKUS is famously complicated with Pillars 1 and 2, export controls and exemptions, committees and working groups, technologies like quantum computing and hypersonic missiles, and of course, submarines. All those things are necessary, but my point is that if we want AUKUS to work, we need to think of our communication about AUKUS as among the most important parts of the program. What is it we want AUKUS to say? I suggest 3 key messages. Number 1, we are committed for the long term to stability in the Indo-Pacific and the preservation of sovereign rights and freedoms of the countries there. Number 2, the trust we enjoy with our allies and friends gives us the capabilities to preserve advantages in important areas like the undersea domain, but others as well. And 3, such an advanced cooperation effort inevitably presents obstacles, but our ability to overcome them is bringing us even closer. Maybe some of the speakers that follow me now will have more ideas about what AUKUS says. So let me not detain you any longer. With thanks to my co-hosts, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute and the Centre for New American Security, I'd like to give the floor now to Kate Kuzminski, who is the Deputy Director of Studies here at CNAS. Thanks, Kate.
All right, we are welcoming today Senator Tim Kaine to talk with us about the legislative perspective on AUKUS. He needs no introduction, but I will give him one. Senator Tim Kaine represents the state of Virginia in the U.S. Senate, where he has served since 2012. Prior to that, he held elected positions as the mayor of Richmond, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, and then the governor of Virginia. Currently, Senator Kaine serves as a member on numerous committees, including both the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, as well as the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He is chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power and the Foreign Relations Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere, Transnational Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women's Issues. Senator Kaine has also worked alongside colleagues from across the aisle on legislation to increase AUKUS cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So please welcome Senator Kaine.
Well, thank you, Philip and Kate, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be together with you and talk about something I'm very passionate about. AUKUS has huge potential within its own sphere, but also I think it can create a template for additional innovative alliances that will promote security not only in the Indo-Pacific, but around the world. And I've been proud to champion AUKUS in Congress as a member of both the Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committee, working with the DoD, working with state, working with my colleagues, but I also really want to point out two of my staffers who are here. Caitlin Kleiber is my Chief Military Advisor, and J.C. Jane is my Chief Foreign Policy Advisor. They've played a huge role in this. And just a quick story about them. When AUKUS was announced by the Biden administration, we reached out right away with the Sea Power bill and a Foreign Relations bill and said, if you need legislation, we want to help. We think we have the authorities we need. 18 months later, 10 days before the defense bill was going to be marked up in the Armed Services Committee, we got an emergency call and the Pentagon wanted to come visit with us in the SCIF. This isn't classified, what I'm about to tell you. They said, we do need legislation. Can you get it in the defense bill within the next 10 days? And we looked them in the eye and we said, we can guarantee we cannot get it in the defense bill in the next 10 days. First, we just don't move that fast. But more importantly, everything you're asking is not jurisdictional in the Armed Services Committee. It's a Foreign Relations Committee jurisdiction. But I happen to be on that committee too. So why don't we do this? Let's work this in a good way. Let's put it through the Foreign Relations Committee as the defense bill is going to the Senate floor. And then when everything's on the floor, we'll try to bolt it together. Caitlin and JC really did a wonderful job in making that kind of bank shot happen. And the initial legislative authorities that were included in the defense bill once it got to the floor was because of the hard work that they did, and I just want to acknowledge that. The AUKUS development comes at such a crucial moment. If we wondered what was crucial about the moment, just look at the visit of Vladimir Putin to North Korea within the last few days. We're witnessing a struggle between two opposing worldviews. A growing number of countries and leaders believe that they want to undermine democratic institutions and destabilize rules-based international system. There have always been such actors, but they're increasingly realizing they need to work together. And then there are those of us, all of us in this room and beyond, who are committed to democratic values, committed to international collaboration and global rules. And this commitment has served as a North Star for decades for U.S. global leadership. I'm obviously with the pro-democracy, pro-international rules side of the spectrum, because I've long believed that the U.S.'s most indispensable national security assets, equivalent to and sometimes even greater than our wonderful personnel, our wonderful innovation, our wonderful defense platforms, are the alliances and friendships and the reservoir of global goodwill that we have painstakingly built across many generations and many administrations of both parties. The networks that we've woven together are such a competitive edge that the U.S. has that no one else has. In the transatlantic context, that's obviously meant NATO, but in the Indo-Pacific context, it's been more of a lattice work or layer cake of networks and partnerships, whether it's the Quad, to developing relationships between the U.S., the Republic of Korea, and Japan. And that's an achievement that President Biden does not get enough credit for, because the American public look at Korea and Japan, well, they're our allies, and that's true. But they needed to be closer and closer together, and President Biden has done a wonderful job with his team in facilitating a bit of a rapprochement civilly there. These partnerships in the Indo-Pacific are dramatically enhanced by AUKUS. While still nascent and with some challenges to work out, the issues around sharing of intense intellectual property and some of the most deeply held classified information and finding budgetary resources to do what AUKUS demands, none of these things are easy. But while this is nascent, AUKUS represents, communicates, and I appreciate your, what do we want AUKUS to say, the ability of a free and open Indo-Pacific and nations in that region work together to keep Chinese aggression at bay or any aggression at bay. It's good to also just deepen the relationships we have with the UK and Australia. And that creates avenues for enhanced cooperation, not only between the three nations, but others. What's often overlooked in these conversations is we can talk about the geopolitics, and everybody here gets that, but what does it mean right here at home? Why should the average American, or in my case, the average Virginian, care about all of this high-minded talk about alliances and partnerships? Virginia, I'm going to admit, it's pretty easy to make the case. First, Virginia is one of 3 sites in the world that has a NATO headquarters in Norfolk. So that headquarters has been in Norfolk since the 1950s. It's an object of pride for Virginians, and it's something where we get the notion of alliances making us stronger because of our decades-long commitment to that. We're one of the most military-connected states in the country, home to the largest naval base in the world, dozens of Army, Marine Corps, and Air Force installations, robust Coast Guard presence, not to mention the Pentagon. We have more than 25 military bases representing each service branch. I'd argue that there's no state more important to supporting our national defense and global stability than Virginia. Virginia is also the shipbuilding state, and Pillar 1 of AUKUS, of course, involves the construction and sale of Virginia-class subs. I was honored to take Ambassador Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, with me to the shipyard about a year ago to talk about AUKUS and the challenges and opportunities, and I was really impressed with how candid we all were, not just about the opportunities, but we were all candid about the challenges that we would face in getting a Virginia-class sub program that's producing about 1.4 subs a year now to the 2 subs a year we need for the U.S. and eventually the 2.3 subs a year we need if we're going to be selling 3 to 5 Virginia-class subs to the Aussies in the 2030s. In Newport News, Huntington Ingalls, or HI, runs one of just 2 shipyards that build these subs. It's difficult to overstate how impressive these platforms are, and I'm sure many of you have had a chance to tour these shipyards. If anyone ever questions to me America's ability to manufacture, I say, can I take you to the place where we manufacture the largest and most complex items on planet Earth, right in Virginia? Those are the subs and carriers, both Virginia and Columbia-class subs that we're building in Virginia every day. But other parts of Virginia benefit as well, and they also are going to have significant opportunities as AUKUS kind of grows. For example, Danville, Virginia, a manufacturing community in Southside whose heart was tobacco, textile, and furniture. All of those industries in the 90s started to go offshore, but they have maintained a manufacturing ethos and have developed something called the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research during the time I was lieutenant governor and governor. It's a great organization that in recent years has developed a strong partnership with the DoD. Graduates of the Institute are equipped with the skills that are desperately needed in the submarine industrial base workforce, and they go on to take high-value jobs that bolster construction programs, especially in the Columbia and Virginia class. I visited not long ago and saw this shipbuilding educational program. People come from all over the country and world for an 8-week segment learning different shipbuilding disciplines. And in the classrooms that I walked through, it was amazing to see people from rural Virginia, people from all over the United States, people from Australia, and a number of Afghans who have come to the United States under humanitarian parole or special immigrant visa, who had already demonstrated a commitment to American security and have decided once their families moved here, why don't I keep supporting U.S. national security by learning to be a sub-builder? All Virginians should be excited about initiatives, and the Danville initiative is inspiring additional similar programs in other parts of the country. We included some of that in the NDA that we just did last week. On to Pillar 2. This is the open field. This is the open field that's just as broad as we might imagine. Collaboration on exquisite technologies, hypersonics, quantum computing, unmanned undersea technologies, artificial intelligence, just gives us such an opportunity. And it's exciting to think about how much there is for us to really enhance each other's capabilities. I would argue in Pillar 2, we're also going to see deep involvement of the higher ed institutions in these 3 nations. That's not been so much a feature in Pillar 1, but why wouldn't it be in Pillar 2? Because we can get great innovation and share. We'll obviously have to work in Congress. The issues around sharing classified technologies and intellectual property are hard. I think at some points along the way as we were working on the legislation, there were some members of my committees asking some tough questions that might have seemed to an outside observer as sort of AUKUS skeptics who are actually AUKUS friends, but they just wanted to make sure that as we're dealing with this information sharing that we get it right, knowing that we need to get it right for AUKUS to succeed. But anything we do could also be a precedent for how we approach relations with other allies. So it's really important first out of the gate to get this right. The last thing I want to talk about is I look at challenges. There's legislative challenges, there's national security, global challenges. The biggest challenge that I'm worried about is workforce. I am on the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee. That's not normally thought of as one of the national security committees. It's not Intel, it's not Armed Services, it's not Foreign Relations. But the biggest obstacle in Pillar 1 right now to meeting our pace of production is workforce issues. And in talking to the Aussies in particular about how they would build a submarine first operation and maintenance, then eventually construction industry, they already have diesel subs, but to build nuclear subs is an entirely different challenge. They grapple with workforce issues too. And I think this is going to be the choke point if we don't recognize it, address it, and be innovative in solving it. The willingness of the Australians to invest $3 billion in the American industrial base to produce AUKUS subs is pretty remarkable. Imagine a debate in Congress about investing $3 billion in the Australian workforce. It would not be easy. But it's a demonstration of Australia's recognition that stability in the Indo-Pacific is so important right now that they're willing to make that investment and then train together to meet this need. But we'll only meet the need if we're creative on workforce. And the last thing I'll say before I conclude is part of meeting this workforce need is going to have to be immigration reform. We can upskill and train. I have a bill that would allow Pell Grants to be used for high-quality career and technical education for the first time. We can do that. But an awful lot of what I hear from my industrial base is a cannibalization, like I'm going to hire your employee because next week you're going to hire mine. And sometimes that happens within a region, and sometimes that happens between shipbuilding regions. But the bottom line is, if we're not increasing the net employment contribution in this industry, we're not going to meet the obligations that we've made, even with dollars to invest. And so those dollars have to be invested in ways that expand the employee base, and that is going to have to include immigration reform. The U.S.'s birth rate is not growing, and even if it started growing tomorrow, we wouldn't see it for 20 years. And so immigration reform is going to have to be part of it. And I'm actually heartened that, you know, out of every challenge comes an opportunity. The super low unemployment rate, the tight labor market, some of the commitments that we've made in this space, I think is going to be the kind of crisis that opens the door for an immigration reform bill that's very focused on workforce. So I hope to have laid out why AUKUS is so important to me as a person representing a state that's so military, that's so connected to sea power mission, as a person who deeply believes in diplomacy. It's not just a tool for cooperation, but it represents a significant investment being made that impacts the life of everyday Virginians, everyday Americans, and it sends a loud signal, not just about what AUKUS is, but who we are. That, you know, when President Truman, after World War II, redesigned the seal of the presidency, and the eagle had both the arrows of war and the olive branches of peace, and Truman made sure that for the seal of the presidency, the eagle was always facing toward the diplomacy side. Diplomacy first. AUKUS is about diplomacy before it's about military investment to accomplish the deterrence that you described. A lot of good work to do together. It's interesting being part of something that you think that the play out of this is going to be over the next 25 years, not over the next election cycle, not over the next 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 presidencies. It's going to play out over the next 25 years before it reaches a maturation point that could then play out over centuries. What an exciting thing to be involved with. Thanks for coming today.
All right, thank you, Senator Kaine. So we are going to open it up for questions here in the room in a moment. So do raise your hands and we'll get a mic to you to ask the questions. But up top, I'll pose a question for you. So those of us in the room are policy experts. We're used to making our arguments to those who make policy or to lawmakers. And you've hit on a lot of the really important points when it comes to convincing Virginians, right? Those who are in the legislative branch have the responsibility of really messaging this to the American people, why it matters. So how do you think Congress is doing that in the House of Representatives and on the Senate side? And what do you find to be effective in bringing home the message of why AUKUS matters to the typical American?
Very good question. And I have to say, I may have an easier time at this being a senator from Virginia if I was a senator from, Kevin Kramer is my ranking member on Sea Power. And he always says, how did I get on Sea Power? I'm from North Dakota. But I have an easy time in Virginia, both because of the military investment, but also Virginia embraces diplomacy and alliances. NATO, so many State Department employees and others who are connected to kind of diplomatic service live in Virginia. It's not a hard thing to sell, but I do think it is important. There is an industrial-based component in every state. And one of the things that AUKUS is going to require of us on Pillar 1, we're going to have to push more work out of the shipyards into the industrial base. If we're going to get up to 2.3 from 1.4, what that's going to need is more of the work is going to be done in the industrial base and then brought into the shipyard and put into the subs, either at Electric Boat or at HI. And I think that is a really important component. So there's going to be even more work in the industrial base. In fact, one of the NDA provisions that we put in was to really kind of build out and grow new innovators and new companies that could be part of the sub-industrial base. So that's number one. Let's make plain to all the fact that this work is not just being done in two places in the U.S. But then I think where we can really show the connection with the different states is what we do in Pillar 2. Because again, it's open field. I mean, it's going to take advantage of our innovators. It's going to take advantage of our research universities. And there's great research being done everywhere. So, I think it's incumbent upon the, you're going to hear from Madeline later, Pentagon and state, in working on AUKUS to think about this, how can we make sure that there's work happening everywhere. I do think the diplomacy argument sells itself. Sometimes Americans feel like, how come we have to be the cop for everybody? How come we have to be the nation defending the freedom of seas and promoting stability, halfway around the world? It's much better if we're doing that in tandem with allies who are sharing that burden with us. And that is one of the key features of AUKUS. And my voters get that immediately. It's important to promote stability, but let's do it by linking arms with other nations who are willing to make investments too. And look, this Australian investment in our industrial base, it's kind of unprecedented. I mean, we had to create a legal authority just to accept that kind of a contribution from the parliament of another nation to build out a defense capacity because it hadn't been done before in any significant way. So I think people will get the notion of shared burden. The U.S. shouldn't bear the disproportionate share of the global security burden, keeping the Indo-Pacific open and free, but sharing that burden is smart.
So give us a little peek behind the curtain on the lawmaking side. Certainly there's a lot of great reasons why we should pursue AUKUS. What are some of the challenges that you run up against when trying to hammer out the NDAA behind the scenes? Certainly cost can be a factor. Are there any other factors that...
I'll give you two, but I'm driving to Charlottesville for a roundtable on prescription drugs at 11, but Caitlin and JC can give you chapter and verse on all the challenges that they ran into. But there really were two. The first is, again, Virginia-class subs. I mean, it's kind of like our apex predator. We're really going to share that with another nation, even a nation we love as much as Australia. That's kind of a tough one. And other technologies. And it was interesting, there were a number of members in the Foreign Relations Committee who loved the idea of AUKUS when President Biden announced it, but when we got into the legislative piece of it, they were tough on the ITAR and some of the other intellectual property and sharing of information. Even with nations that are part of Five Eyes, they were tough on it. They weren't AUKUS skeptics, they were AUKUS supporters and friends, but they understood that A, we got to get it right, because B, whatever we do, we'll set a precedent that we'll live with in other relations. And then the second one was the dollars. And I give Roger Wicker some credit here. Roger, who, obviously our ranking on SASC, big AUKUS supporter, definitely wanted to do it. But he looked at the capacity of our shipyards and he said, okay, we've made some investments in the submarine industrial base that will mature and produce base. That's fine, but there's still a delta that needs a commitment if we're going to really reach this. And he was a holdup on getting. He's not on foreign relations, so we got our bill through foreign relations. Now it's on the floor. We want to attach it to the NDA. He was not going to allow that to happen unless and until he got a commitment from the administration that this unpaid delta that was needed to do the work was going to be included. And that's the reason that President Biden, when he announced the supplemental that we ended up passing in April, the supplemental, most of us think it's Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine, but there was this portion of it that was an Indo-Pacific portion that included a U.S. commitment to make investments in the industrial base to match what the Aussies were doing and to build upon the investments we've made in the last few years. And he was tough. Even though, he's from a shipbuilding state and there's going to be a lot of work there, he could have just said, sure, let's do it. But he wasn't going to sign on until he felt that there were the dollars there. And eventually, when the president sent the SUP over and included the money, then he said, fine, we'll put AUKUS in the NDAA. Now, it was still months before we voted on the SUP, but eventually we did. And I will say, in that SUP discussion, which took from September to April, the Israel-Gaza piece was complicated, and the Ukraine piece was complicated. The only piece that didn't get a lot of flack from anybody was the AUKUS piece. And I think that was a positive, that people really saw that as a virtue. But I'll give Roger some credit in helping us get over the dollar hump.
All right, I think we've got a time for a question in the audience. We've got the microphones.
Please.
Senator Arm, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Harlan Ullman, and you would have made a great vice president. My question actually transcends AUKUS. November 5th, Election Day, is also Guy Fawkes Day, and that might be illustrative. In my lifetime, which is considerably longer than yours, I've never seen politics more brutal. You have one presidential candidate calling the other a dictator, the worst president in our history. One party says the other party is the greatest threat to democracy in our history. The other one responds. The day, January 21st, could be a lot worse than January 20th. We have all the makings of a potential October 7th in this country. What's being done right now, senators like yourself who are bipartisan, to prevent, after the election, that there's going to be some kind of reconciliation? Because if you firmly believe the other party is a threat to democracy and you lose, what are you going to do?
And maybe tying that back to AUKUS too, thinking about how this presents in the international community.
Sure. We want to be an example. I mean, we're linking arms with democracies. We want to be an example. But January 6th, I'm going to find a good side of everything. January 6th has deprived us of the ability to lecture anyone. And it's actually not bad to not lecture people. I'm chairman of the Americas. I go throughout the Americas all the time. And I have discussions with nations that are backsliding on democracy. But my discussions are not, we're doing it right and you should do better. I went with a group of people to stop a coup in Guatemala in December. And to be able to sit down with governments saying, look, we understand democracy is messy and there's challenges. But we also understand there's a right way to step forward and a wrong way to step forward. We're not coming to you with any sense of superiority. We're coming to you with some scar tissue and some sadness. And can we share our experiences so that we might learn and be better? And so I think that in the Senate, we've tried to do some things that I would kind of put into the guardrails category that are not a guarantee of another January 6th, but they are guardrails against some bad behavior. So I'll give you a few examples. When President Trump engineered the last shutdown of the federal government at the end of 2018 and early 2019, I got a bill passed that is a very significant guardrail against shutdown. And the bill is, in the event of any shutdown now or into the future, all federal employees get paid. That doesn't stop flirting with shutdown, but as you get right up to it, it's like, I'm going to really lock people out of their office, but pay them anyway. And so we haven't had a shutdown since early 2019, and that guarantee, I think, has been a guardrail against it. Here's another one. Marco Rubio and I just did a bill. No president can withdraw from NATO without a two-thirds vote of the Senate or act of Congress. That is a democracy and alliance protector, and it actually speaks to a really interesting ambiguity in the Constitution. The Constitution tells you how to get into a treaty. The president negotiates, two-thirds ratification vote in the Senate. The Constitution is silent about getting out of a treaty. This is the first time we've gone back in and said, you can't exit it without Congress. And there was a Supreme Court decision in the 1970s that sort of said a question like this, how to exit a treaty, is a political question for the executive and legislative branches to resolve. So we think we're on solid ground there. We fixed the quirks of the Electoral College Act that led the ability to kind of throw the whole thing in question if just one House member and one Senate member raised a question about the certification of one state. Now it takes a vote of 20% of each of the bodies to call even one state's electors into question. Again, not a guarantee, but a guardrail. And we're doing some other things, like trying to block the ability of a president to Schedule F civil service employees, convert everybody from a civil servant into just a political employee that is hired or fired based on loyalty to the leader. So we are trying to come up with some strategies that are guardrails, not guarantees. And I think there are more that we need to do. But I don't disagree that there is an existential nature to the challenge ahead of us.
Well, thank you. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and also thinking through how our own credibility as a nation plays into these important international relations. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next,
you have a great panel to follow, so stay and listen to them.
There's a great panel
and I'm
to
off
follow.
to Charlottesville.
So I would like to turn over. We'll be turning it over to Dr. Nishank Motwani of ASPE, who will introduce the panelists for the next portion of the event. For those of you who are on our online audience, we'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and this continues our panel. We transition to a panel discussion today. My name is Nishank Motwani. I'm a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. It gives me great pleasure to welcome such an illustrious panel to discuss and to build on the discussions we've had over the last 2 days on AUKUS. The way we're going to run this panel is that I will provide some opening remarks just to set the framework of the discussion, and then I will invite each one of the panelists to provide their opening comments, and then we will open it up to Q&A, and if I might have time, I'll try and squeeze in a question or two, but the idea is to try and have a discussion. We have folks online as well who might be sending questions, but I hope that those of you who are in the room would also be able to ask your questions to everybody here. So before I jump in and start with my opening remarks, I would like to introduce the panelists that are here today. I would like to begin to my left. We have Madeleine Mortelmans, and she is the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategies, Plans, and Capabilities at the U.S. Department of Defense. Next to Madeleine, we have Paul Myler, who is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian Embassy. Next to Paul, we have Matthew Stein-Heffler, who is a Senior Advisor for AUKUS at the U.S. Department of State. And then we have Dr. Taylor, Trevor Taylor of the Royal United Services Institute in the UK, holding the position of Director of Defense Industries and Societies Program. Thank you, each one of you, for giving me your time, for giving all of us your time. And what I want to begin by saying is that over the last 2 days, we've had a robust discussion on AUKUS. We've talked about what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what does it constitute, and what it is and what it isn't as well. And few of the points that really stood out in that discussion were, and I'll just go over them just from the top of my head. Number one, what is AUKUS? AUKUS is about creating deterrence. How? It is by working and deepening those existing relationships and deepening the alliance between Australia, UK, and the US. Its purpose is to engender deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. How do we do that? As Senator Tim Kaine was saying, diplomacy plays a really prominent role in that. It's not just about hard power. And that regional engagement piece of it makes a big difference. Bringing in the region in the Indo-Pacific comes from a place of not superiority, but about equality. Treating our partners, treating our Pacific Island states, treating states in Southeast Asia and other places with equal degree of respect, value, because the idea is that we have a better value proposition. Over the last 75 years, we've benefited from the status quo. We want to be able to extend it. But the dynamics around it, the geopolitical dynamics are changing. So what do we do about it? AUKUS is meant to address that challenge that exists before us. It is designed to, it is not the only solution, but it's part of a whole suite of different ways that we're responding to the pacing threat that is before us. And so how do we get there? We know Pillar 1 constitutes submarines. Pillar 2 is a whole range of different technologies. Pillar 2 in some ways is the strategic glue that holds it together. We're going to have capabilities that are going to be delivered far sooner than Pillar 1. The submarines come online. But it is not just about the delivery of Virginia-class submarines. Of course, that is the pinnacle of it. But it is about the establishment of Submarine Rotational Force West in Australia, having the infrastructure to be able to maintain British and American submarines so that they can be deployed faster without having to go back to their shipyards. And that, in turn, produces that deterrent effect. And these were the points that we encapsulated in our discussion of the last couple of days. So without further ado, I'm now going to turn over to my panelists, and I'm going to invite Madeline to please provide your opening remarks. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm so pleased to be here today. I want to, just before I begin, observe that lots of credit is given to the Department of Defense for having the best technology. But as I look over at my colleague who has his remarks on an electronic device, I feel like a little behind. So the State Department clearly has better technology than me today. But in all seriousness, the National Defense Strategy, which my organization is responsible for drafting, developing, and helping the Secretary to implement, clearly identifies allies and partners as a force amplifier to the Department's approach to strategic competition. As Secretary Austin affirmed this month, our alliances and partnerships are our greatest strategic advantage. When I talk about this NDS, the 2022 NDS, and what's different about it, I always highlight and observe that almost every U.S. strategy for years has emphasized the importance of our allies and partners. What's different about this NDS is a call to action, to do things differently, to drive change in breaking down barriers to how we work with allies and partners, to bring them in sooner to our planning processes, to actually think at every stage of planning, operations, activities about how we can do this better with allies and partners. In that context, AUKUS is exactly in line with our National Defense Strategy. And another key takeaway of this National Defense Strategy is about aligning our policies, investments, and activities to help sustain peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. Again, another key aspect of the AUKUS partnership. The United States is energizing our unparalleled network of alliances and partnerships, modernizing the strength of our military, building our allies' collective capacity, and implementing a modern industrial and innovation strategy. AUKUS presents for us a unique opportunity for our three nations to enhance our military capabilities, improve the interoperability of those capabilities, and together deliver deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. Through AUKUS, we're working on a full spectrum of capability development, generating requirements, co-developing systems. Is that better? Okay, thank you. Co-developing new systems, deepening our industrial-based collaboration, and ultimately, the key goal, the outcome, delivering advanced capabilities to our warfighters. Like the United States, Australia and the United Kingdom maintain unwavering support for an international system that respects the rule of law and the peaceful resolution of disputes free from coercion. We share a common understanding that we're stronger together and that we are deeply appreciative of the UK and Australia as fantastic partners. So in terms of that's the rationale and how AUKUS fits into our overall strategic approach, what have we done? What have we accomplished together? The AUKUS partners have been hard at work over the last 3 years, and we have a lot to show for our work. In the first 18 months, we developed an unprecedented phased approach to providing Australia under Pillar 1 with a conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine at the earliest possible time. This capability will bring together the best of what our navies can do. We're already delivering on this ambitious plan. Over the last year, we've increased U.S. submarine visits to Australian ports and welcomed Australian naval officers and sailors into U.S. training schools. In March, Australia announced its strategic partnership with defense industry, setting the foundation for Australia's nuclear-powered submarine production and maintenance. But AUKUS is about so much more than just submarines. Under Pillar 2, we're developing together, we're exercising together, experimenting together, and fielding together. For example, in just 3 years, we've looked at how we are already looking to deploy technologies. For example, AI and machine learning algorithms that allow our undersea systems and that connect our undersea systems and P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, providing assistance for human operators to process even more volumes of information from our trilateral sonar buoys to identify the signal and enhance our undersea capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. We're also figuring out how we can use AI to deliver advantage to our warfighter. For example, in March, we demonstrated the ability to train a mission-tailored AI model in real time and deployed it to the UK and Australia platforms in mid-flight. Beyond AI, we're also demonstrating the ability to launch and recover undersea uncrewed vehicles from both US and UK submarine torpedo tubes, increasing our flexibility and our operational interoperability. Looking forward, as Senator Kane highlighted, the field is wide open, but we've got big ambitions. Over the next year, we're continuing to grow in Pillar 1, increasing the number of Australian personnel being trained in our shipyards, an effort that was made possible thanks to outstanding bipartisan congressional support in the NDAA of FY24. Additionally, U.S. submarine Navy tenders embedded with Royal Australian Navy sailors will conduct maintenance on a U.S. submarine in Australia as part of our efforts to build out Australia's capacity for the Submarine Rotational Force West. In Pillar 2, working alongside our warfighter community, we'll identify new opportunities to increase our collective collaboration. And I'm particularly excited about the work we're doing with defense industry and the innovation communities. And of course, we'll launch the Maritime Big Play in practice, our trilateral maritime autonomous experimentation series that will allow us to exercise autonomous platforms from the seafloor to the stratosphere to learn how we can experiment and operate more interchangeably and share data to operate more effectively together going forward. I want to emphasize that AUKUS is not static. It will continue to grow. The ideal vision is that AUKUS becomes part of how we as departments of defense operate together, breaking down those barriers, realizing the vision of our 2022 NDS that said that we're going to figure out how we plan, how we develop, how we field, how we operate together earlier and more effectively. And AUKUS is critical to realizing that vision. With that, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madeline. I think some of the points that you raised were absolutely critical in terms of what is the call to action. NDS demonstrates that there's a call to action. And just as a demonstration, back in March of this year, the Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine paid a visit to Submarine Rotational Force West. And that, again, is a demonstration of this capability producing a deterrent effect, that we don't necessarily have to wait for the Virginias. I mean, there's still some time away, but that doesn't mean we can't do other things in the meantime. And now I'd like to hand over to Ambassador Myler.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Madeline. You've just ripped the guts out of my presentation.
Mine too.
I'm going to rip the guts out of Matt's presentation. And I'm a little bit cautious anyway because, you know, a lot of my comments here are built around our Defence Strategic Review, our National Defence Strategy. I'm talking to a group of think tankers. Your job is to know those documents better than we know them, even though we wrote them. So, you know, we can skip through this pretty quickly and get to the questions sort of thing, I think, maybe. But, you know, the headline, yes, the Indo-Pacific is facing increased strategic competition, rising tension, reduced warning times, and an unprecedented military build-up that's taking place without strategic reassurance or transparency. And this, you know, obviously raises concerns in Australia, raises the risk of military escalation and miscalculation. Our response to that has been to seek asymmetric advantage and asymmetric capabilities, and to use those asymmetric capabilities as a means of deterrence by denial. This has been set out in our Defence Strategic Review 2023 and then the 2024 Defence Strategy. And then earlier this year, the National Defence Strategy, the updated Integrated Investment Program, building on the Defence Strategic Review, really generated a credible pathway for the concept of national defence, that is, whole of nation, whole of statecraft, all levers of national power being brought to bear to protect Australian sovereign decision-making space. It's a pretty historic reinvestment in the ADF's posture, capability and structure. It's pretty pointy. It's pretty focused on what the task at hand is. It's pretty committed to us being more capable, more self-reliant, and taking greater responsibility for our own security. And that in order to do that, we need to bolster our national resilience, our industrial resilience, and our supply chain resilience. And I think those three elements are you know, increasingly a focus for the Australian government outside of the context of AUKUS. This is you know, a lot of our time at the embassy is spent on supply chain resilience across all elements of our national resilience challenge. So, you know, obviously, if you've got a strategy of denial that you want to exercise through asymmetric capabilities, then nuclear-powered submarines are, you know, fundamental to that. When you've got the sort of coastline that we've got and the sort of distance that we need to travel, they simply, you know, their ability to operate undetected just presents a lot more complexity for any adversary as they think through their operational planning, and allows us to hold any adversary at risk at much greater distances. And obviously, for Pillar 2, nothing says asymmetric capability than technology edge across all of the 6 areas of sort of nominated effort under Pillar 2. But I think actually what we're looking at being the real asymmetric edge is the ecosystem that we've created with the assistance of Senator Kaine and a lot of his congressional counterparts. You simply cannot comprehend in what we've achieved in a little over 1,000 days. And on the legislative front, you know, in a little over maybe 300 days, and even, you know, a year and a bit ago, we were being told that our ambition was too great and it wasn't the sort of fundamental reform and creation of an ecosystem that was going to crowd in innovation into national security, that was going to make not just the work we do now quicker and more efficient, but make national security an attractive space for people to come into because the barriers to entry were lower, and then to deliver the deterrence effect of our adversaries understanding that there are lines of effort out there that they have visibility of. There are lines of effort out there that they don't have visibility of. There's a collaboration that's working across time zones and geographies and industrial bases and research bases that they don't have an understanding of, is just incredibly powerful. So I spend a lot of time with people telling me in this town that AUKUS isn't moving fast enough. AUKUS is moving at light speed, and if you look at it from a historical context of what has actually been achieved, compare what we've done in the last year to the last 40 years of trying to reform ITAR, we've done a fair bit. I'll finish up there.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Myler. I think one of the points that you highlighted was about the sheer scale and amount of resources that would be required for AUKUS to gain that momentum. It is indeed it is Australia's moonshot. That's an accurate characterization because back home, the industrial base, we've got to build it from scratch. And the NDS outlines how we're going to get there, and the complementing document, the IIP, explains where that money is going to come from. And I think speaking to both of those, looking at both of them together, it presents and articulates the picture about what is Australia's strategic thinking going forward. And that is to engender that deterrent effect. We're not there yet, but the lightspeed work that's taking place, especially under Pillar 2, is where that's going to be delivering those effects much sooner than would be the case under previous circumstances. I'll now ask Dr. Taylor to please come in and provide his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Very difficult to say a few things about a huge topic, so I've picked down to three. First is that the high purpose of AUKUS is seen as deterrence and strengthening security in the Pacific. That's absolutely the case. But if that goes well, I would remind everybody of Joe Nye's comment about security, that nobody notices it until it's not there. And I think in that situation, provided we have continuing peaceful relationships in the East Asia part of the world, that the equipment part of AUKUS will become the metric by which it's judged, and the strength of its foundation. So it's quite interesting to remember that. I mean, there's one driver, but what's going to be the measure of it? And I suspect it's going to be the equipment part. In that context, we all know that the Pillar 1, the submarines, there's a very defined set of project activities that need to be delivered, and I am confident that there will be significant potholes along the path that to getting that, and publics need to be prepared for that. Pillar 2 is much more open-ended, and how do we make sure that Pillar 2 gets a good press so that people are confident? So, to say, first point is that the equipment side will be the metric by which it's judged. Second point is that are the players in AUKUS in terms of equipment cooperation. The US hasn't really done collaborative projects for the perfectly good reason it hasn't needed to. Yeah? The UK has done lots of collaborative projects. It's kind of almost innate with major, especially in the aerospace area, but even in missiles and so forth. We've got a lot of experience in how we make collaborative projects work. There is a slight, I would say, I'll look at David in the back, there's a learning process that we try to do it better. Yeah, it's not very easy, but we try to do it better. There's been a learning process. The next one, the next big challenge for us is, of course, GCAP with the Japanese. And the enabling environment, which we've talked about a lot for AUKUS. All the UK projects have had to generate an enabling environment that makes that possible. Now, I think there has to be a learning experience for the United States in this. And one of the contrasts which is less visible to the public is that I think the public procurement regulations in the UK, the law, I don't think it's not 60 pages, is it? It's about 40 pages. Yeah. So we have a fairly light legal system. I have seen and regularly seen the federal acquisition regulations and the defence federal acquisitions in book form. And all I will say is you do not want to be hit over the head with either volume. So the US, in trying to create an enabling environment, there's a lot more legal challenges than we have. Even European law says if you're doing a collaborative project, it doesn't really apply, yeah, for defence. So it's a lot easier for us to, it has been a lot easier for us to adjust. So I think that maybe, and in the UK experience, there's been quite a lot of experience of bringing on partners that have got money and demand but don't have technology. Yeah, that was the case if you go back with Tornado. It's the case with Italy. Italy's aerospace industry had been shut down after the Second World War because it had been an Axis state. And Tornado was used to help them build up their industry. Spain with Typhoon. Rolls-Royce actually bought a 50% share, I think it's 49% share, in the Spanish engine company so that Spain could have some hope of delivering the 13% of the engine content in what is, I will just say, an excellent engine that gives doesn't appear in the news because it doesn't break down. Maybe we should be having a bit of a look at other collaborative projects to see how they've been used, because my big point here is that over the time, the people that it will be hardest to keep happy are the Australians, I think, because at the present time you specify your defence industry as a fundamental input to capability. So you absolutely, but you haven't got much manufacturing and development experience. So putting in place Pillar 2 projects that actually help Australia to feel that this is a really good deal and they're benefited, I think that's a major challenge. The last point I would make very quickly relates to technology and innovation and these SMEs and the innovators. I hear it all the time. What's happening in the world of technology is that technology that's not particularly defence focused is moving at a very high rate of knots. And a lot of that technology has defence applications, but it's not primary, yeah, for the companies concerned often. On the other hand, the threat is also moving very quickly. Yeah, we didn't anticipate the kind of environment that we're in. So when you put those two graphs together, what that suggests is that the old way of doing acquisition, which was that the military thought of a requirement, and then somebody thought of a procurement strategy, and then somebody implemented the procurement strategy and had a preferred bidder, and then there was a contract. The technology's gone and the threat's gone. So your thing's out of date. Now, what that says to me is that if we're going to have success in acquisition in or out of AUKUS, we have to have new relationships between the people that really understand the technology and the people that really understand the threat. Yeah? So that has to be also fixed into AUKUS Pillar 2. And the particular bit of acquisition policy that it threatens is the sort of traditional idea that what we're going to have are competitive tendering, yeah, on the basis of a fixed requirement. Yeah, I don't think that works in the future. I'm not sure it worked in the past, but it certainly, I think it's going to be out of date. So Three things about AUKUS. I will stop. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor. I think it goes to the heart of the matter of that. What is the demand signal? What is the demand signal that the government is giving to industry to be able to inject capital into certain areas for development so that end users, the military, primarily, can use those different capabilities? And over the last 2 days, we had a robust discussion about, well, how do we actually conceptualize, or do we need to rethink our acquisition process? Looking at requirements is one way of doing it, and that wish list just continues growing. And as you very rightly said, by the time those requirements are articulated, goes to tender, and so on, technology is gone, and the threat is probably gone, or it's become worse. It's metastasized. So we need to rethink about how we're approaching the problem. And one way is, as we discussed, is to actually look at it as a problem. What are you trying to do? What do you want to do? And so shifting our thinking is going to require time, but that's the area that we're going to be working towards. And so thank you for drawing attention to that. I would now like to turn to Matthew for your opening remarks, please. Thank you.
What's left to be said after this esteemed group and the senator? No, I think it's quite refreshing, actually, that all of us have pretty similar line of thinking from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different roles or agencies. I would also say that the senator's remarks is also something not to be taken for granted, that there is true bipartisan support, and I think each of our systems for AUKUS. AUKUS is different in many ways, and it needs to be different. It has to be, I say this all the time, AUKUS is and has to be catalytic, has to be a catalyst for change, and the ambition of AUKUS is more than just putting out a specific project. It has to be that, of course. We have to advance capabilities, but we also have to achieve the strategic level Y. So as I was kind of thinking about over the last couple of days, what more could I add in terms of the conversation as a diplomat from the State Department? There's a couple of things. And I think the bottom line up front is, I think, foundational for us in government in particular. And this is why I think this event and events like this are so important, is that our policy is stronger if we actually have fora and we listen to a wide range of views and perspectives and bring that in and interject it into the policy process. I think we need to do a lot more of that. And I'll touch on that in a couple of different ways today. Starting first at sort of the strategic level, as I think about our strategic why of AUKUS, we do a pretty good job, I think, of communicating this at the government-to-government level. There's more that we need to do to reach the wider range of audiences. And I'm talking about the publics, not just in each of the three countries, but also in the broader region. Our Australian government colleagues have done a great job of that. I will be very frank and honest that the State Department, it's only been about a year since we've had a centralized organization to coordinate. And only about 2 days ago did we actually establish a new office reporting to the Secretary, thanks to the requirements put in the NDAA by the US Congress. But I would say that our communication needs to be more about discouraging conflict and about a lot of what Madeline focused on. It's about the evolution of our longstanding partnerships and alliances, which is our strategic advantage, and leaning on some of our strengths, like our openness and our transparency, which our adversaries, our competitors don't have the ability as much to lean on. So what we do at the State Department in particular right now is we're trying to advance the use of data for much of our work. We're tracking, analyzing, assessing, trying to stay ahead of the public and private disinformation in particular, but also keep our finger on the pulse of what are we seeing in terms of the trends, and are our communications actually working? And we have more work to do there. The operational level. we talk a lot about the enabling environment or the ecosystem that we're building, and that's vital. It's essential to unlocking the ambition or the potential of our work in AUKUS. And of course, as a State Department representative, ITAR, that four-letter word, we are absolutely focused on getting the legislation across the finish line. I've mentioned this a couple of times over the last couple of days, and I'm happy to say it in this public session too. The government does not have the monopoly on big ideas, and that includes for AUKUS. And so we want to hear from a fora like this, what are the next big enabling environment ideas that we should consider? Third, and finally, is more at the tactical level. How are we, at least at the State Department side, going to try to create this institutionalized process? So that way it's not temporal, it's not ad hoc, but really that we are more proactively engaging and doing outreach. And to meet one of the requirements of the National Defense Authorization Act, we recently launched a new informal network, the AUKUS Partnership Network, for a wide range of groups. It's a voluntary basis, but reaching out to a wide range of audiences, like venture capitalists, small and medium enterprise that we've touched on here today. Groups like this, civil society and think tank organizations, academia, research groups, and so forth. And the benefit for State Department is that's our job, is to talk to people, reach out to audiences, listen, and bring that back into the conversation. So we'll be focusing on doing a lot more of that outreach. And I know from some of our colleagues on the Hill, and as Senator Kaine pointed out before, this is, and as well Paul and others that have touched on, this isn't just a individual effort. This is a whole of government, whole of nation effort, and we do view it that way at state in particular. And so we're looking to see how we can bring all of our tools across the State Department to bear for this, and working in partnership with a wide range of interagency colleagues. And I would point to the efforts that our Department of Commerce colleagues have taken on the dual use space, and in particular, as we've had our conversations on the ITAR side. But we're also looking at soft power tools for the region. Things like exchange programs and other peer-to-peer or people-to-people exchanges that we can bring to bear that are AUKUS adjacent but AUKUS supportive. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Matt. In fact, I'm going to take my role as moderator to ask the first question, if I may, and I'm going to build on one of the points that you made, and it's generalizable, so that I hope that each one of the panelists can jump in and ask and respond to the question. You mentioned, and others have too, about reaching a broader audience. It's not just about the audience within the institutions within which AUKUS is being discussed, so State Department, Defense Department, in the UK, and back home in Australia, but it is about also reaching the broader domestic audience, to explaining to them why does it matter. So can we, and link that to, why does AUKUS matter to our respective domestic constituencies, and linking that to the region, soft power, diplomacy. What does that lift look like? What is the strategic why, as you said, but that distinguishes AUKUS and makes its value felt, perhaps, with regional countries? So could I begin with you, Matt?
Sure, happy to. And I think our Australian government colleagues have done a wonderful job of that outreach, especially to the region, as they're so close to and have great longstanding ties, especially with some of the countries of the region in the Pacific Island countries and so forth. I think one of the areas where we're thinking about messaging at State Department is it's very important to note that AUKUS is one of many partnerships that we have. And the reason why is because we have to connect AUKUS in our broader Indo-Pacific strategy to what are the people of the region in particular seeking. What's in their interest. And I think it's quite obvious that there's a lot more interest on the economic side and other pieces. And so I think we have some work to do to continue to hone our messaging or taking tailored approaches to different audiences in a true strategic communications fashion with different audiences. And that's some of the work that we trilaterally, including in some of our international engagement working groups, what we're talking about and trying to bring in some of that analysis and real world experience to continue to advance our strategic messaging.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to go?
Sure, happy to jump in. Look, at one level, I think this is one of the great successes of AUKUS, both that it's been accepted within the Indo-Pacific and accepted at home, and I don't actually put it down to our work, although we worked very hard on that. The reality is that people at home and people in the region are seeing the military build up in tangible terms that is causing us to have concerns. They are seeing that there's no transparency about strategic intent or strategic reassurance. They are seeing that we now live in a world where large neighbours invade small neighbours, and the world needs to respond to those things. So I mean, we are, this is in one sense, a creature of its environments, even though we still would have had to make moves in this direction if Russia didn't invade Ukraine, or some of the other changes that have happened. I mean, we needed to make the right decision about our future submarine force, and that has led us down a particular path. But the transformative nature of that path has been made easier because of what's happening in the world, because of 4 years of sort of economic coercion against Australia, because we see what happens in the South China Sea and elsewhere. And I'm genuinely surprised, and also within the region. I think we worked very, very hard to reassure the region that this was a propulsion system, not a weapon system, and all of the this was not a proliferation initiative. We've had to fight against a lot of misinformation on that front. But we've got the right message behind us. We've got the facts behind us. We've got a history of being very open about our strategic intent, very transparent about what we're trying to do. Each of our strategic reviews and that are briefed extensively in the region before we actually release them, and we put in that hard yard. So I think the acceptance has been there, but I am surprised on the upside how effective we've been, and I think we need to be continuously vigilant as to the sort of counter narratives that are out there.
Absolutely. Is it either Dr. Taylor or Madeline, would you like to jump in, or can I throw open the floor to questions?
I think very quickly, in the UK, it's seen as a great opportunity, but never underestimate the challenges, and we need to be. I think that Australia's long been regarded as a significant place for UK firms to do business, and as many of you are aware, BAE Systems are already building the Hunter-class ships in Australia. They have a separate. Australia is regarded as a domestic market for one of the domestic markets for BAE Systems. Kinetic are there, so it's always been regarded as and something that enhances that market is welcome. And I think the third thing is that anything that makes working with the United States actually on effective and reciprocal cooperation is a good thing. So it's I say not without its risk, not without its challenges, but it's a great opportunity.
Yep. And as Matt said very clearly, you have the four-letter word ITAR, and despite its existence, we're still trying to figure out and navigate our way to continue that collaboration and figure out those solutions. Thank you. I will now open up to Q&A for anyone in the room who would like to ask. Adam?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for a very enlightening panel. Appreciate it. I'm Adam Leslie from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute here in DC. Each of our countries is coming up to an election cycle, and notwithstanding bipartisan or multilateral support within each of our countries, there's due to be challenges thrown up through those election cycles. What do you perceive those challenges to be, and what sort of things are being put in place to assure the resiliency of AUKUS?
Do you want me to have a crack at that first?
Go ahead.
So I think we've seen quite genuinely that this is a project and a collaboration that's been driven by underlying strategic alignment. Yes, there might be a business opportunity and other things, but it's fundamentally at the underlying strategic alignment, which is shared in a bipartisan way across our three capitals. And this has been a journey, right? It started with conservative governments in Australia and the UK and a left of centre administration here. Then we flipped to left of centre administration. There's an election coming up. We might have all three capitals, all three governments from a left of centre perspective endorsing AUKUS and the strategic intent of it for a period of time, and then we might lose one of the centre-left governments. Who knows? But the underlying strategic alignment is quite there, and I think that's been the key. Now, there is some nuance around language at different times, but different people come at this in different ways. I would throw a little bit of shade at the British system from time to time, which are a little bit more focused on this being a great business opportunity. And it's like, if you're focused on that, that might not be, this is bigger than a business opportunity. I, get a bit of shade thrown at me from time to time when, maybe in our system there's a little bit too much focus on this as a great jobs opportunity. And my response to that is, hey, we're all spending all this time and great ads on TV about building giants because workforce is our problem. We need to be talking about this being a career for life and job creating and transformational for people who enter this industry all the time. So just because we talk about the importance of the jobs that this is creating doesn't mean it's like another bridge or another highway. This is not a fiscal stimulation project. We've got to talk about it though. So there's the governments will come at things in different ways and as they evolve. But the underlying strategic alignment, the underlying level of trust that has been demonstrated to us, and the political will. I think one of the things that was sort of the most interesting part of this journey was the initial announcement that we were going to do AUKUS. And then we said, and we're going to take 18 months to think about how. And everybody went, couldn't you have done that before you did the announcement? What people didn't understand was that first announcement was three leaders looking at each other and say, if we walk out onto this stage and we say we're going to do this and we fail, then we have demolished deterrence in the Indo-Pacific and across it. I mean, if we cannot look at each other and say we have the political will that no matter what it takes, this is going to be successful, then you actually have a negative effect on deterrence. And so that's why step one was, big intake of breath. Are we actually going to do this? And then walk out, say we're going to do this, and do the hard yards. And I think that political will and that political intent, we're locked in now.
Madeline, please.
So what I would say from the U.S. perspective, I would agree with the points that you've made, and I would just reflect on, for decades, the United States defense policy has relied on and highlighted and held up our network of alliances and partnerships as the way that we conduct our nation's defense. It is core to our ethos and our every operating concept in the department. I reflect on a past secretary who had a career in the military before, who said in his entire career he had never done an operation that wasn't done side by side with allies and partners. I'd also reflect that for a very long time, the Indo-Pacific has been growing in importance for the United States national security interests. And I worked on defense strategy after defense strategy that have signaled the importance and the growing importance in the U.S. commitment to that region. Those two precepts are foundational to what is AUKUS. Those are bipartisan, long-standing traditions of how we operate and what is part of our national interests. And in that same way, AUKUS aligns with our national interests. To work together, to stand side by side with partners who are willing to put the work in, to put the resources in order to ensure that we have the most advanced capabilities in the hands of the warfighters to strengthen deterrence in a region of shared importance. Recognizing that those capabilities can be lifted and shifted to apply where they're needed, but ultimately that's what they're there for. There's an enduring aspect to this, and that's why we're seeing such wide bipartisan support on the Hill. I think that's why you're seeing such buy-in, such a sense of opportunity. Will it be challenging? I think what we're trying to do, this catalyst for change, what we're describing, this fundamental shift, particularly for the United States in how we develop and produce and field systems, change is hard. It's going to be hard. There's going to be friction, but there's going to be friction and challenges regardless. I think what we see is that doing so aligns with our national interests, and those are enduring interests.
I would take a slightly different view and say it is at least a theoretical option that the UK could abandon interest in East Asia on the grounds that we can't afford it. Now that might seem unlikely, and it is unlikely, but in the 1980s, UK defence papers said explicitly we have to focus on Europe, and if you want resources for out of area, then you're not going to get them. That was a clear, that's what the world was like in the mid-1980s. I don't think that's going to be the case today. I think that when you take something like AUKUS and look at the people support it for different reasons, and different people in different organisations and backgrounds support it for different reasons. I think it has to be seen in conjunction with GCAP in this context. And what they come together is actually that the UK interest in East Asia, of which AUKUS is a central part, should be sustained. And nothing that I've seen in my contacts with the Labour Party, which is most likely to win the election, we think, that's part of their thinking too. So. I don't think that the impact of the election will be great. They will do a review, and I think a lot of it will be continuing with where we are now. Our officials are not allowed to say anything about that, so please don't ask them.
I know we're just about out of time, but I would say, just to reinforce Dr. Taylor's point, there are arguments for AUKUS in lots of different areas that we could emphasize. And there may be space where we need to bolster some of the data or research that we have to make those arguments. But I think as a career civil servant, I think there are ways to continue to bolster the resiliency of AUKUS in the long term.
I know we're just about out of time because I'm getting a signal from the back that we have to wrap up. So in concluding remarks, what I would just to reinforce what you've said is that, in effect, this is it. There's no plan B, as in this has to work. In other words, this is the whole of nation uplift, whole of government uplift, and where we have to articulate the strategic rationale for AUKUS to sustain itself multi-decades, because we're talking about elections happening this year in all 3 countries. And looking at the delivery of the Virginia classes 20, 30 years from now, if we look at the 30-year timeline, that's 10 different Australian governments.
The AUKUS class.
The AUKUS class, yeah.
The Virginia class are going to arrive a lot quicker than that.
That's right, that's right. So I want to thank each one of you for giving us your time and for taking questions. I wish we had more opportunity to engage in a discussion. I apologize for the online questions that have also come through, but I don't know if you're going to be sticking around for a little bit, but if you are for a couple of minutes, then some folks here would like to ask you some questions. I would now like to turn over to Chris from CNAS, who would like to give us concluding remarks to close the event. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Nish. Good morning. My name is Chris Belisle. I am the Managing Director of Corporate Relations here at CNAS. I want to thank each of you for participating in the Trilateral AUKUS dialogue yesterday and today. The conversations and insights shared have been open, very open at times, inspiring and honest. Enthusiasm is strong, and we are building momentum to support the strategic partnership. To ensure that AUKUS thrives, we must put our ideas into action, and this can only be done by bringing industry, policy, and civil society together to have meaningful, real discussions. We have a collective responsibility to ensure that the strategic partnership continues to be more than words alone. It must continue to demonstrate effectiveness and impact. AUKUS is based on the strength of allyship between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And this has never been stronger. Together, we drive forward so that the strategic partnership reaches its full potential. CNS will continue to do our part to support these ongoing discussions, and we ask you to join us. There are several people I would like to thank for their collaboration and support in hosting this successful occasion. Dr. Philip Shetler-Jones from RUSI, Dr. Nishank Motwani and Adam Leslie from ASPE, our incredible interns from both ASPE and CNAS, and last but not least, my wonderful colleagues from CNAS, Evan Wright and Nate Sakoshit, Jasmine Butler and our communications team, and many others. You're all amazing, and I am so proud to have you as my colleagues. I hope you all enjoyed visiting our new offices here at CNAS. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend.